we have Rita Cofield. She's the lead organizer for the Mafundi Institute Friends at Mafundi. Rita was raised and currently lives in the Florence Graham area of Southeast LA. She BA in art planning from Howgo HBCU and just recently graduated from SC with a master in heritage conservation. Since the beginning of the pandemic, she has been substitute teaching, consulting on issues of heritage conservation for her community. Her experience in community projects is supported by a moral responsibility.
I think we're losing you a bit there, Leslie.
So in the meantime, while we get Leslie back, Rita, do you want to maybe tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, you're mute. There you go.
Yep. Yeah, sure. I think all of those things up to my current or my recent graduate degree. I've been doing community work here in Watts and focused on the Watts Happening Cultural Center or the Mafundi building. So working with the community has been my full-time job while I'm teaching. And I've been doing it since I started school. So I'd like to say that I am a neighborhood preservationist, focused not just on buildings, but the entire neighborhood. One building affects the entire neighborhood, so we have to take in consideration of preserving and adapting or rehabbing a building affects the neighborhood. So yeah, I think that's it. That's what I've been doing lately.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Well, you can get started. Let us know about Mafundi and let us know how we can get involved.
Everyone see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. So the topic was kind of architectural versus cultural significance. And instead of giving like a hard and fast definition, I just wanted to take you guys through through why the Mafundi building and the campus is both architecturally and culturally significant, and some of the other buildings in the neighborhood as well. But I'd first like to acknowledge the Tongva community, to whom the land where the Watts Happening Cultural Center and campus sits originally belonged to them. The spark, not the spark, but the continual narrative of the community of Watts continues to be surrounded. Is this, I want to go that part. There are articles and reporters that report that Frank Gehry's new building that's being built pro bono for, I think it's for Children's Institute, just right down the street. The narrative that they're displaying or that they're creating is that Watts has a beautiful building, and it just does not seem fair, because there are a lot of beautiful buildings in Watts, and there are a lot of architects, there are a lot of prominent architects who built in Watts. So with that, I just wanted to take you guys on a brief tour of what makes the Watts Happening Cultural Center both architecturally and culturally significant, because we need to change the narrative of the surrounding buildings in Watts. A Frank Gehry building is not the only beautiful building and won't be the only beautiful building in Watts. The Muffundi building is just about a few blocks northwest of the historic Watts train station and about a half a mile north of the historic Watts Towers. The building was identified by AIALA, which is the first comprehensive program to identify historic resources in Los Angeles, as eligible for local, state, and national designation. It was designed by two Black architects and urban planners, Arthur Harry Silvers and Robert Alexander Canard, who are also social activists. It was constructed in 1970 and the first major construction in Watts after the Watts Rebellion of 1965. The Cultural Center is one of the most prominent cultural centers in Los Angeles from 1970 to 1975, and the only cultural center of its kind in any Black neighborhood anywhere in the US at the time. So it's understandable that hearing about the city of LA's request for proposal for the Muffundi building that indicated no preferred community requests for the development, as well as no real guidelines to maintain its eligibility for nomination as a landmark, a group led by Father M.D. Hamilton of the renowned Watts Prophets formed the Friends at Muffundi, or FAM, to spearhead nominating the building as a historic cultural monument and revive its community-centered programs, and once again bring attention to the arts as a tool for building community. I think I have a timer on my slide, so forgive me. So that's how we formed Friends at Muffundi, with the guidance of Father M.D. Cultural heritage is defined as a shared bond or belonging to a community, represents history and our identity, our bond to the past, our present, and our bond to the future, Sankofa. We chose to bolster our application for the historic landmark status for the Muffundi building using evidence of its cultural significance under criterion 1 and 2, rather than for its architectural style or its architects. And this was actually a safer, more defensible position, as the importance of Silvers and Canard are still coming to light, and because those standards for architectural significance hasn't changed since they were first adopted by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association in the early 1850s to protect the homes of founding fathers John Hancock and George Washington. So with criterion 1, the What's Happening Cultural Center was built to house the Muffundi Institute that was founded in 1967. It was formed out of a need for an outlet for creative expression after the 1965 rebellion. The Muffundi Institute supplied programs that taught social as well as artistic skills, while the What's Happening Cultural Center provided the safe space to carry out those programs. The Watts history extends beyond the rebellion, before and after, which is why I think when people think about Frank Gehry's building, they only think about one narrative. But it's important to remember the history of Watts goes beyond the 65 and the 92 rebellions. The first Watts Renaissance in Watts began in 1918. Arts began to flourish around during the Pan-Africanism led by Marcus Garvey and the New Negro movement, which was better known as the Harlem Renaissance. The second Watts Renaissance began as a result of the broader civil rights movement and the coming of age of the Black arts movement, along with discrimination in areas of producing art. Black arts institutions formed for the purpose of allowing students to freely express African aesthetics. And out of that came organizations like the Studio Watts Workshop, the Watts Symphony Orchestra Association, the Watts Writers Workshop, which produced the Watts Prophets, the Watts Summer Festival, and the Watts Towers Art Center, and of course, the Muffundi Institute. Under criterion 2, prominent Hollywood celebrities and influential Black activists like Tut Hayes and Ron Karenga were directly responsible for the success of the Muffundi Institute from its inception and throughout its time at the What's Happening Cultural Center. Hollywood celebrities came by the Muffundi building and taught at the Muffundi building, like Marge Champion. By the time she started working at the Muffundi building, teaching students dance, she was already an accomplished Hollywood dancer and choreographer with husband Gower in the 1950s, and she was also named Woman of the Year in 1969. And of course, the Watts Prophets, the contribution to the LA art scene was unmatched. Richard Dito, the Watts Prophets consisted of Richard Dito, Father M.D. Hamilton, and Otis O'Solomon. They emerged from the Watts Writers Workshop and laid the foundation for rap music. Some of the Watts Writers Workshop artists taught classes at the Mafundi Institute while also attending the workshop. Other artists that came through, Marla Gibbs came and took classes because she wanted to try acting. And then in 1975, she went on to land the role of the no-nonsense maid Florence on the Jeffersons. And Roger E. Mosley lived in the community. He was born and raised in Watts and attended Jordan High School. He took acting classes at the Institute and also became a teacher. And then he went on to land his most well-known role as TC on Magnum PI in 1980. And then there's Marie Bryant, who revolutionized modern dance. She had already performed in musicals and films by the time she started teaching dance at the Institute. And in the 1970s, she opened her own dance studio. She passed away in 1978. Under the criterion 3 for identifying significance, the Mafundi building doesn't neatly fit into the definition of having distinctive characteristics of a style, type, or method of construction. And its architects, like I said, Robert Canard and Arthur Silvers, have yet to be recognized as master architects. But the Mafundi building, does, however, mark a distinctive period in history, unlike the 1950s or 1960s, where architecture was incredibly diverse with a high level of technological experimentation and social considerations. There was a considerable emphasis on architecture's relationship to the environment and the setting of sites. Arthur Silvers and Robert Canard had numerous accolades and awards. Silvers was president of the Los Angeles chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, or CORE, and CORE was instrumental in the community of Watts in exposing housing discrimination and redlining in restaurants. He was parliamentarian and historian for Noma in the 1970s, chairman of the Urban Planning Advisory Committee Council when Thomas Bradley was mayor. He was also an artist that expressed himself through architecture, and he may have been the lead designer for the Mafundi Institute. And of course, Canard was honored in 1986 as a fellow of the Los Angeles chapter of the AIA, and a lifetime, of course, you guys already know that it's a lifetime honor not granted to many Blacks. In 1991, he received the Institute's Whitney M. Young Jr. citation for his bold response to national social issues. So Arthur Silvers and Canard were not only instrumental in social activism, but they built over 700, or they designed over 700 buildings. And the style with which they constructed the Mafundi Institute may be in the style of what they called Western, Afro-Westernism, or Afro-Western, because in the planning of the redevelopment of Watts, they were tasked with coming up with a plan after the rebellion. And that plan included an entire planning for the entire community of Watts. They spoke about this style called Afro-Westernism in their plans for the design of Watts. The whole neighborhood was it was not, the plan wasn't fulfilled, and they did piecemeal buildings. We don't know if the Mafundi Institute was one of those buildings that they did, but they did several buildings in the style that resembles the What's Happening Cultural Center. Canard and Silvers joined other architects in the community that built in the community, like Paul Williams, Gordon Kaufman, Richard Neutra, Wharton, and William Beckett, who designed vernacular architecture in the neighborhood of Watts that blended in with the landscape and has served the people of Watts well. Other buildings and structures in Watts that AIALA conducted and considers eligible for nomination include churches, murals, schools, and of course, cultural centers. but the city of Los Angeles and developers seem to forget about them as they continue to propose new construction and provide spaces for the community instead of investing in what's already here. The Holy Redeemer Church that was built in 1908 was identified by Survey LA as eligible for designation because it's an outstanding, although late example of mission revival style with characteristic shaped parapet, tower, element, and arched entryway. It's one of the very few architecturally significant buildings in Watts. And then there's the New Missionary Baptist Church, which is not on, it's not surveyed by Survey LA, but it was the site for Aretha Franklin's recording of Amazing Grace. She's an iconic music and personage identified with Miss Franklin. So designating this building as a historic cultural monument, I think is important. Its exterior may be unremarkable and carry no markings of a master architect, but it's given the community a sense of place. And it kind of etches them in the timeline of history associated with Miss Franklin. This little home, Survey LA reported that it's eligible for designation because it's an excellent example of an early 20th century hip cottage with neoclassical influences, and it exhibits a high quality of design. So Saving the Watts Happening Cultural Center is not just about increasing the percentage of landmarks associated with Blacks. It's bigger than that. It's about the legacy and revival of the community-centered arts and culture movement. It's made up of social justice artists like Styx, arts and culture agencies like the Watts Towers Art Center and the Mafundi Institute that we're trying to revive. It's about agencies that are focused on racial equity and cultural centers, and about changing the narrative. So thank you for allowing me to bring a little bit of awareness to just not just one, but many of our architecturally and culturally significant resources in the community of Watts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. Thank you. This was really good and very on time with what the purpose of this is. So thank you.
Sharing.
As Carmen put in the chat a little while up, if there's any questions, please post them over there. Hopefully we can have Rita take a look at some point and maybe answer some more questions on that. But as we move forward with today, thank you again for being our community spotlight, and thank you for sharing with us what the great work that you're doing over there and bringing a sense of awareness to us for that. And yeah, we're looking forward to getting involved as much as possible.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you,
With that,
Rita.
we're going to kick it over to Will. Yep, there you go.
Thank you so much, Rita. And thank you for what you do for Watts and for the Los Angeles region as a whole. Right now, it's my pleasure for our second day of Encompass, our fifth annual Encompass. It's my pleasure to welcome to the stage, to the virtual stage here, Lance Collins, AIA Noma, who is the president of the Southern California Noma chapter and a director of Partner Energy. Lance, welcome.
Great, thank you, Will. Good morning to everyone. Great to see all of you all virtually again on day 2 of the Encompass conference. It's always an honor to be included in this conversation. And this is really exciting. I guess I'm gonna start by saying thank you to Rita for that excellent presentation. The community spotlights, both today and yesterday with the Think Watts Foundation have been really powerful, and I'm glad that you're able to share that, with the group. And I'm sitting here thinking about, man, I need to go drive around some more and go back and see some of these buildings. It's been years since I've been to some of these areas. So I always feel a little bit envious whenever I see all these pictures. It's like I got a little checklist of things to do now. But I want to just kind of start off with number one, thank you and acknowledgement to the AIALA and SoCal Noma JEDI team for all of the hard work they're doing in putting this event together. and it's obviously very timely with everything that's going on. But this is certainly a conversation that we've been, going for 5 years now, and we look forward to continuing for many years in the future. I hope today we'll keep all the same energy from yesterday's presentations with the Think Watts Foundation, the community design initiatives, and the DEI challenge presentations, and keep all that going, and really, keep people energized to go back to their work and to their offices, and thinking about things with a new perspective, with a more diverse perspective. Something that Gabrielle touched on this morning, which is, how does this impact the design that we do, the work that we do, not just changing our office cultures, not just learning about things, but actually changing the way we design and create for our built environment. And the last thing I'll kind of close with is, something that I think is always kind of on the forefront of my mind, but certainly, timely with yesterday being Earth Day. Everybody has acknowledged, and I think, from the federal level on down to the local level, we've acknowledged the climate emergency and the actions that need to be done in response to that. And as an industry, architecture has taken a very strong stance on building buildings that are more sustainable and responding in that fashion. And the piece that I keep wanting to remind everybody is that we also need to keep thinking about, social justice and equity, all these conversations in the same level of emergency fashion, where we have to address that issue as an industry with the same force, with the same innovation, all those sorts of things that we do from a climate change perspective, so that we don't lose any of these cultural heritage sites that Rita just, showed us all. And, we don't, lose any voices in the participation in the process. So, that's the message I have for all of you, is to keep thinking about all of these issues in the same sort of force and energy that we look at climate change, that we look at, sustainability, with Earth Month and Earth Day going on. And hopefully all the presentations yesterday and today will continue to keep everybody energized with what we need to do going forward. And I know I'm excited to get back to working on certain things, just with a lot of things that everybody shared. And hopefully you guys are as well too. So I'll leave it there, and thank you to everybody for joining us again today. And Will, I'm gonna hand it back to you.
Thank you, Lance. And, thank you so much for, the collaborative spirit you've given to the AIA Los Angeles chapter, and the opportunity for SoCal Noma and AIA to have a committee in common, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. It's fantastic. It's my pleasure right now to take a moment and express our genuine gratitude for the support we received for this conference. Quite a few of the LA architecture firms and construction firms and engineering firms have demonstrated to us their commitment to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I'm going to take a moment to read some of those company names to you. Cumming Corporation as the presenting sponsor. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing to allow us to do this program. Our champion sponsors include HNTB and Anderson Barker, Steinberg Hart. We also are grateful for NAC Architecture and how they were instrumental in allowing us to bring so many students to this virtual conference today as our student scholarship sponsor. I'd also like to recognize our friends of Encompass, which include Co-Architects, IBI Group, SRK Architects, Uniball Radamco Westfield, Woods Baggett, Walter P. Moore, and ZGF. And it's also the support of our participating sponsors that really allow us as chapter staff to dedicate our time to organize these programs, along with our volunteer committee leaders. AC Martin, Bellsberg Architects, Bester Architecture, Clark Construction, Clune Construction, EYRC, Fur Studio, Hanson LA, HKS, KFA, PCL Construction Services, Plenary Americas, Swinnerton Builders, and Webcore Builders. It is the strength of that commitment and that support that is allowing the architecture community to come together and as strong as possible. So with that, we take a moment to genuinely thank you. And I will hand the program over to Leslie, one of our co-chairs of the JEDI committee. Leslie, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Will. Appreciate it. And thank you again to our sponsors. This has really been a labor of love for the JEDI committee, and it's really been nice to see Encompass grow and shift and change over the past 5 years. So thank you to our sponsors. As yesterday in the kickoff by AIA President Wade Killefer noted, Encompass began 5 years ago with a focus on procurement reform. And every year since then, with the exception of last year, we've continued to have the same conversation as there still exist barriers to consider disadvantaged status in state procurement. Prop 209 still exists. The measure was overturned soundly, actually, in November. As Lance Collins noted yesterday, the number of Black-owned architecture firms has been decimated since Prop 209's passage. The theme of this year's conference is what's next. And this morning we have 3 leaders representing architecture, developer, and public client. They each have active backgrounds in DEI. And I'll let them give you their own introductions, but please allow me to introduce and thanks for joining us, Tony Gonzalez, Vice President of HNTB, Jennifer Trotter, Community Relations and DEI Manager for Plenary Group, Plenary America, and Miguel Cabral, Executive Officer of Diversity and Economic Opportunity for Metro. I will let them introduce themselves. Jennifer, if you'd like to kick us off.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me and inviting me to participate in this event. I've attended in person and have always been a big fan of how this program has evolved. And as an urban planner, I've always had a lot of respect for architects and love how we're able to marry those ideas together. A little bit about myself in my current role as Community Relations and DEI Manager for Plenary. We're a long-term investor of public infrastructure, and my role really builds upon a few years of this evolution, if you will, with public-private partnerships growing in the United States as a procurement vehicle, as a way to deliver assets, but also as a way to maximize the impact of these assets in a positive way for communities. Plenary specifically was developed because there felt like there was a missing link in the P3 industry where there was emphasis on the public and the private sector, but not so much on the partnership piece. And expanding on that commitment to really putting emphasis on not just the who, but the how, partnering, was a natural evolution to include a community relations and a DEI emphasis. So we're really concentrating on how do we do that and how do we do it well. And that's a lot about what my role will be going forward at Plenary.
Thanks, Jennifer. Tony.
Well, thanks for inviting me, Leslie. Certainly appreciate being part of this event. I am Tony Gonzalez. I am a native of Los Angeles, grew up in East LA. And I'm currently the studio leader for HNTB Architecture here in Los Angeles, but it's a national firm. We do work all over the country. We are concentrating on 3 primary areas of sports, aviation, and transit architecture and civic architecture as well. And so we have a number of projects across the country. In sports, we design professional and collegiate sports facilities. In airport and aviation, airport and airline terminals and other facilities, and in transit, a number of stations in various stations for Metro and other transit entities. Some of our current projects, well, we just completed Allegiant Stadium in Las Vegas for the Raiders. We are currently in construction on the LAX automated people mover project, of which I serve as the Link's lead architect for that project, working for the developer and for LAX. We're also currently completing the LA Metro Crenshaw line that goes by the airport and through Leimert Park and connecting to the metro system at Expo. And also we're working on the 6th Street Viaduct, the bridge crossing the Los Angeles River and connecting East LA. Those are some of the projects that we work on, and a lot of others nationally and within the region. But I think the thing that is important for me is to also have you understand that I have had my own MBE, DBE firm, ACG Environments, for 20 years before I joined HNTB. And those contracts were, and that was back in 1983 and through 2003, of which time my small firm, we were probably about 50 plus people at the time. We were acquired by HNTB, and in those years, I worked at both private and public contracts. A lot of work for the city of LA, the county of LA. I was involved in LA City Hall restoration, a number of hospital, medical center projects for the county, a lot of work for LA Metro. Probably I spent every year of those 20 years with the LA Metro contract, and then a number of projects for LAWA. One of the things that as I rose through the sort of the projects over those 20 years, one of the things that happened was that I became a joint venture partner. My firm became a joint venture partner of JMA at the time. We were working on the North Hollywood Extension construction management contract. And that was a joint venture between Jacobs and Mott McDonald and my firm ACG that made up the JMA. And so that was a pretty significant occurrence in Los Angeles contracting, in that it was the first time, or one of the first times, that a minority firm actually became a prime joint venture partner with majority firms. So that was a pretty significant event. So that's the background that I come from, but it's not just, my point of view comes from both being a prime consultant working on major projects, but also the other side of it from a small business consulting MBE, DBE project. So I'm bringing that perspective today for everyone. Thank you.
I'm excited about getting into that perspective. Absolutely. And last but not least, Miguel.
Good morning, Leslie, and thank you to you and to AIA for inviting Metro to participate in this important discussion today. It's good to be here with Jennifer and Tony. I think I'll get a lot of from what they have to say as well. Tony, I heard you mention Metro quite a few times, so I'm looking forward to hearing you and your experience with that. I'm, as Leslie stated, I'm the Executive Officer of Diversity and Economic Opportunity at Metro. I've been there for about 12 years. Prior to that, I was in the private sector, background in transportation planning as well. In my department, there's a few functions that we are over: small business programs. So when you hear MB, DB, SB, disabled veteran, all those good programs that are designed to help historically underutilized business, they fall under my space. Workforce development, or at least a component of it, also falls under my space. Compliance, We have a project labor agreement, a few other things, prevailing wage, Davis-Bacon falls under my space, and outreach also falls under my space. We have the good fortune of having a tremendous leadership at Metro, both at the board level, CEO and senior leadership team who are very progressive in their ideas about diversity and inclusion, and have allowed me to develop programs that are aggressive and that really are impactful. So look forward to discussing that today. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you all. So in the past, I feel like the conversation is always, we can't get work. Proposition doesn't allow us to get work. We don't know where to go. Clearly, we have three people here who, particularly in Tony, who have gotten the work. And I'm wondering, from your perspectives, and with the loss of the minority-owned firms, what do firms need to be doing to get on the radar to get the work? Particularly in this environment, like what's next for getting work? Because clearly the work is out there. Clearly, I feel like there's an interest in partnering in supporting minority and disadvantaged firms. So what's the missing piece as far as you think, as you're concerned?
I don't know if there are missing pieces to the puzzle that we all need to solve. I mean, I think that part of what I had done when I started my firm was think of it as not necessarily from being an architect and a designer, but more from being in business and looking at what it is that the larger entities and clients are looking for. So, there was, when I said Metro, Miguel, it's, I've been working on Metro for almost my whole career, and started out with doing some staff augmentation in 1983 on MOS1, which was the initial operating system for Metro and the Red Line. So I think that we have to think of it as not necessarily only being an architect, but being in business. And so you look for those opportunities in which you can get into a contract with firms, prime firms, as well as looking at what it is in the AEC community, with going to meetings, getting closer to the clients, Metro or city or LAX or LAWA, whoever it is. So I think that just thinking about it as being in business versus being an architect, because I think we tend to limit ourselves with that sort of focused area, because you have to look at what is going to be potentially useful to the project teams and being able to contribute. I think that's a very important part of it also, because it's not just about getting a SBE or MBE, WBE contract. It's about delivering. And I think that once you deliver, you get some competence, and doing the networking within the organizations like Noma, like AAAE, other SHIP, LBA, those types of things, and just networking to let people know who you are and what you're doing, and those relationships are what pays off in being added to proposed contracts and so forth.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with Tony's perspective. I think coming from my previous role working for a prime contractor and design builder, understanding what the value you bring beyond those certifications is immensely important. It really underscores that this is a partnership and not a check the box process. And I would also say there's definitely some onus on those different architectural firms that are seeking work, but there's also onus on the prime contractors when it's a partnership, or the project owners that are selecting those companies, to have a open door type policy that really invites people to introduce themselves for those networking opportunities, getting to know folks and building relationships to understand what those capabilities and value adds are. Metro's a great example that has set up that sort of structure where it's open doors and let's talk and let's get to know each other. But I think that's something that's really important for other project owners and prime contractors to do as well. If we want to see that sort of collaboration, we have to be intentional and purposeful about how we are participating and connecting and building relationships with diverse-owned businesses and local businesses. If I can add one more, if you know your niche, having that as part of your value add, and really growing incrementally or thinking through things through in a process-oriented way. I can't tell you how many times, not necessarily architects, but different subcontractors or perspectives that said, hey, I can do anything for you. And it's like, all right, but your background says that you do X, so how can you do Y and Z also?
So yeah, speak to your expertise, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Miguel? You're muted. Unmute yourself.
Thank you.
Right.
Definitely agree with Tony and Jennifer on their perspective that firms have to find their niche, get to know folks. Here at Metro. We do try to open those doors. As you know, A&E procurements at public agencies are subject to the Mini Brooks Act and the Federal Brooks Act. So it's strictly based on qualifications. So if you're going to be part of a team, that's all they're looking at. They're not looking at cost until later. So a big piece of that is getting to know folks and being on teams and starting off where you can, getting that experience. So when they ask that public agency experience question as part of that RFP, you're able to answer that. I think what I want to focus on my response to this question on, though, is property owners, project owners such as Metro with significant infrastructure development programs like the one we have. I don't think we have that excuse that Prop 209 failed. I mean, not Prop 209, repealing Prop 209 failed last year. Prop 209 has been around for more than 20 years. So we don't have that excuse. We should have developed programs already that were responsive to our communities, our historically underutilized communities that are race neutral and gender neutral, but that have the same impact for these communities. One of the programs that I can talk about at Metro is our Small Business Prime program. It's our set-aside program for small businesses. The way we develop that program is if you're a DBE, and as you know, DBEs have to be historically underutilized firms, so socially and economically disadvantaged. So minority firms and women-owned firms are DBEs. If you qualify for that certification, we automatically certify you for our SB certification. What that has meant on our SB Prime program, we've awarded about 1,600 contracts under that SB Prime program, about $250 million worth of SB Prime contracts as well. In fiscal year 2020 alone, those small businesses, out of those that we awarded in 2020, 94% of them were also certified as disadvantaged business enterprises. So there's ways for public agencies to get some of the same impacts to our historically utilized business and to make sure that they're being able to share in these opportunities and doing it legally and, you know, with Prop 209 in mind, and not having race conscious and gender conscious programs, but being very targeted and being very implicit about what our goals are and what we want to do at Metro. We have a mentor protege program where primes aren't just required to bring on DBEs or small businesses as part of their contracting plan. They're required to mentor them, and they have to submit a 17-point mentorship plan. Then we monitor that plan throughout the life of the project. As part of the evaluation, they get 4 extra points if they submit a good enough plan, and we evaluate those. So I just don't buy the excuse from property owners that Prop 209 is here, or as of last year, it's still here. It lost. ACA 5 lost by quite a bit. It's not an excuse. We've been in this environment for 21 years. We should have figured it out by now. Not to say that things can't change, but always looking for new ideas. And if you have significant infrastructure development in your portfolio, it's something that must be considered. We made a lot of promises at Metro when we went after our bond measures and our sales tax measures and how that money was going to be spent. Part of that is DEI, and part of that is supplier diversity. It's a big part of it, actually.
How do you feel, Eddie, how do you feel that that private entities can push in this direction? Because clearly public entities like Metro are making that leap. But what about the private entities? What do we need to see from that? And how do we push them to make these kinds of decisions?
I think private entities are more aware today after this past year or so of the social issues, and we see larger corporations making commitments like what we've seen happen in Georgia and Atlanta. So we work with airlines, the big airlines, of course, but I'll talk a little bit about what United Airlines has done, and they have they're very conscious of diversity and inclusiveness, and they have their own goals and requirements. Well, I wouldn't say requirements because that's not the best word, but just looking at diversity, inclusion in their teams, in their projects. Many times, airports will have their goals, and the airlines want to reflect that as well. So I am finding and have found for a number of years, working with those private entities, a consciousness of inclusion and diversity, and what they tell us when we're looking at a project. We were the architects for Terminal 7 and 8 at LAX for United Airlines, and so that was part of what they have imposed and impressed on consultant teams that propose them. So there is a consciousness. I think that there's a corporate private side that is being part of the participation of diversity and inclusiveness in their work.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Tony's perspective, and having come from a general contractor, design builder perspective previously, that was really focused on private industry. I would say the split is somewhere between 75 to 80% of the client base was private industry. There are quite a few private owners that are engaged in thinking about supplier diversity as part of their business model and business practices, well before the uprising that we saw last year. And with the plenary perspective, we specifically work with public entities. That's who our client base is. Yet we always have private partners, right? We have our general contractors and design builders that we're partnering with, that as well as long-term operators and maintenance providers. In their capacity, there's also that sort of emphasis that plenary brings is, hey, we're not just working with the public client, but from the private sector, we are responsible for also thinking through how do we make the most impact in communities, and how do we build a proposed project that not only is going to win and is going to build a piece of infrastructure, but that it's a long-term partnership with the community, and what is built really does impact the community. I think that's an important piece of that private sector conversation is it's not just about the private owners, but also the private sector that's supporting those owners. So
I think maybe I'll tackle that 2 ways, Leslie, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Number 1 is to private owners who are bidding on public agency contracts. If you don't take supplier diversity into account, or you're not serious about it, it will show sooner or later. May not show in that proposal because the numbers are there if you proposed and met goals, but it will show later during the life of the project when prompt payment comes into play, when utilization of proposed firms comes into play, when compliance comes into play, and agencies pay attention to that. I can tell you that Metro pays close attention to that. We're actually looking at ways to measure prior performance on DB and SB as part of an evaluation factor. So that's something that's probably going to be coming out soon. So we pay attention to that. Number 2, as a public agency, what can private owners do? Metro has a Transportation Business Advisory Council that's the member entities are business chambers or small business chambers, women-owned business chambers, minority business chambers. It's actually part of the law that created Metro, so it's legislatively required. We have lots of business owners that come and talk to us and demand and ask and are partners with us for programs. Developing the SB Prime program was developed hand in hand with our Transportation Business Advisory Council. There's no point in creating programs here at Metro kind of in a vacuum. Us in our offices are now at home on Zoom and virtually if we don't talk to the small business community. So joining these organizations is important. If your agency of choice doesn't have one, get them to create one. It's important that they have one and that they hear the voice of the diverse communities when they're trying to implement their infrastructure development program. I can't stress that enough. I don't want to use the word lobby because then you have to register as a lobbyist and all that good stuff. And I don't want to get an issue with our ethics chief. But TBAC, that's not a problem. You can join TBAC at Metro. If you ever want to come to our meetings, just go to metro.net/connect. You'll find all our events there. But you'll learn a lot. You'll meet lots of people in this space as well. That's very, very important. And you'll find out what's happening. And if it's not something that you think is working or you think it can be better, that's a forum for you to speak to. One of the other things that I can say is usually when we develop a program, if we have enough time, and sometimes we don't because we want to get a new program out quickly, we'll put it out for public comment. Sometimes I get great and a lot of public comment, and sometimes I'll get 1 or 2. Provide that input. It's very, very important that the programs that we developed make sense to our communities. And if we don't hear from you, we're just kind of trying to figure it out on our own.
It is important that entities like Metro have TBAC. I was involved back in the 80s in creating TBAC, and I was involved with the legislation, working with Richard Katz when he was in the state government on writing or having impact and input into the Metro work. And I was with part of SHIP, Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers, that kind of initiated that need with Metro and say, we want to talk to you. We need you to recognize that who we are and who other small firms are. And so we worked very hard with Metro and to create that TBAC, and started to include organizations like AAAE and so forth, and started to accumulate that. And that's how TBAC grew. And so those are the types of things that firms need to be a part of. And it goes back to that networking and letting people know who you are and what you do. So that's a very, very good point. Yeah.
We had a question. How do you see alternative delivery contracts providing different opportunities for DEI?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, in particular thinking about public-private partnerships and the growing importance of it and I guess frequency of it in American procurement practices. And I think there is a really great opportunity. Some of the same sort of things that we've been talking about apply when it comes to the P3 model. And I'm sure Miguel will have some thoughts on that and design build and other sorts of different delivery models also. But for P3, I see it as an opportunity since it's such a long procurement cycle. It's an opportunity and, in my opinion, the responsibility of developer teams to be thoughtful in their approach and to start off with not just understanding the client and the project, but also understanding the community, the larger community where the infrastructure or facility is being built, including the business community, including who are the different organizations that are interested in building up capacity of those businesses, and frankly also the residents that are looking for job opportunities. How do we build up the pipeline, not just for construction, because construction gets a lot of play on that, a lot of play on apprenticeship programs, but how do we really think about our K through 12 pipeline and encouraging students to consider architecture, design, with that business focus that Tony mentioned early on as they're preparing for their next phase of life, whether it's community college, or some other path. And with that understanding of what makes up that community, comes an opportunity to build relationships. And when you have those relationships and you understand the community and there's that embeddedness, then we're able to come up with creative solutions together and implement them, which of course leads to having, to Miguel's point earlier, actually doing what you're saying you're going to do and having that level of transparency and accountability to not only the client, but the broader community, so that, things aren't behind closed doors, but we're saying, yes, this is what we've done, or you know what, we're having challenges. Let's work together to figure out how to fill those challenges. Because I think we all know there's not really a project that goes along just perfectly in any sense, whether it's from the DI or technical perspective. There's always a little bit of pivoting to be successful, and you got to be on your toes, right? So I think those are probably the 4 pieces that are most important for including DEI, not just from the supplier diversity side, but also that workforce side in the P3 environment.
I think that's dead on, Jennifer. I still remember when design build was considered an alternative delivery method. And I don't really think it is anymore, but nevertheless, when that happened, people were asking the same question: how do you make DEI? How do you get supplier diversity in this new model where you don't know the phases of the project, how it's going to be built yet? You really only know the A&E piece. It's important for this group. But you don't necessarily know that construction piece because the project isn't designed. And we found ways to work with that. There are difficulties. It does create a few more issues, but there are ways to work with that and to meet goals and to surpass those goals. With P3s, we already know that the partners in that P3 become more of, I wouldn't say they become the agency, but they definitely have more of a ownership stake in that project. Obviously, the agency is still the project owner, but the partners have more of an ownership stake. So that evaluation criteria of those P3 proposals becomes even more important in terms of what they're going to be doing with supplier diversity, what they're going to be doing with workforce diversity, how they're going to be working with our programs, but also what are they bringing to the table and how serious they take it. Because in a lot of ways, agencies such as Metro will be relying on those lead partners to do a lot of the work that we typically do. We'll be monitoring and enforcing, but we'll be relying on those lead partners to do that work. And we don't want issues. We want it done. We want to do our audits and say it, great, you passed your audit. Everything is going smoothly. Obviously, as Jennifer said, there can be issues, and we work with those as well in the partnership type environment that we have with our contracting community. But there's more ownership stake in these P3s, and we're looking at partners within the P3 environment that take this space very, very seriously, bring more to the table. Public agency employees are human just like anyone else. How many problems can you avoid? Is supplier diversity going to be an issue that we have with your proposal? That's something we take into account as well. It's important to the region, it's important to our board, our CEO, and it's important to us to make sure that that's a consideration when we're evaluating these proposals.
And I think that, it always is going to go back to the fundamentals of business. And whether it is an alternative delivery contract, design build, like we are currently working on the Crenshaw line with Metro, or even DBFOM, which is an interesting alternative. And that's what we're working on with LAWA and the Automated People Mover project. It's design, build, finance, operate, and maintain. And so that's a very, very wide spectrum for a P3 to deliver. And the good thing about it is that it touches a wide spectrum of delivery. So there are inclusiveness. I don't want to use requirements, but these inclusiveness goals, and agencies will be looking for what that is, and you do score points in evaluation and criteria besides the design and besides the construction, and these P3 entities are looking for the same goals that we would on a different project, a non-alternative delivery project. So it's good that the arena is large and it's widespread, that the breadth of being able to deliver for small minority women organizations within that spectrum goes into supplying, it goes into contracting, subcontracting, specialties, that side of the construction delivery, but it's also in the design and other components within the front end. I think it's the same thing in terms of doing the networking that you need to do, having relationships with entities like Plenary and others, having a relationship with contractors, and so it's I think it's really good in that it provides a delivery of a contract and seeking contracts to do good work within communities for hiring, for contracting, and all of that. So I am encouraged by P3s and that it is a much bigger program with a wider spectrum of opportunity for a number of designers, suppliers, other consultants, and so forth.
Hey, Lance, could you ask your question? It dovetails very well to this conversation with P3s.
Sure, I just typed it, but my question was, how can public agencies and P3 developers kind of go beyond the metrics of just supplier diversity, saying, okay, how many people have we hired, or who has what percentage of the contract, but really talk about how do these projects reflect the communities that they're going in. You're talking about the Crenshaw line or Metro, or you're talking about whatever project it may be. How do we require something, incentivize something, kind of steer that part of the process, not just how many people worked on the project or who worked on the project, but what is the delivery of the project at the end of the day?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a great question. And from the developer perspective, and I think this will be similar to what a general contractor or designer perspective would be, regardless of the type of project it is or delivery model, is we're all taking cues from the public sector because we want to win, right? We can't exercise these DEI programs if we're not winning and having the opportunity to implement. So some of the things that we've been recommending to some of our clients to consider is have non-compliance points for not implementing. I mean, that's a true big signal for the private sector to say, not only are we saying have a supplier diversity program, have a workforce development program, but we want to see it happen. And I tell you, developers will hear loud and clear when you say a non-compliance program. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with the P3 or DBFOM model, non-compliance points are put into the contracts, the agreements on a number of different issues. If related to maybe schedule, or another example might be maintenance. If during the maintenance period, there isn't a milestone met for roof replacement or what have you, then the developer has to pay back to the public entity. Public entities can do that for not meeting a supplier diversity program as well, or not meeting a workforce development program. And I think there's tools like that that can make the programs more effective and really put emphasis on impact and on implementation rather than just a plan, right? We got to go beyond the plan.
Yeah, and I think, beyond checking the boxes and exceeding those goals that may be set, it's about an attitude of people that work within companies about doing good, and because that's part of what we do. We certainly want our teams to reflect the community, and it used to be referred as complexion back in the day, but we want to make sure that it's diverse, and you do, because what we want to do, and many times we're asked by an agency client, what are you doing for small business and diversity, and what are your metrics for that? But it's also just about saying that we are trying to embrace small business, small minority businesses, because that has the impact beyond the numbers. And so, we will often, bring in a new small business in order to grow them. And for me, that was, you find, it's almost like you find these advocates within the agencies, and people that want to see you prosper, and that want to help. And so there is a beyond the numbers kind of attitude of doing well. And when we talk to like this, we have conversations with like the CEO of LAWA, and working with them, because we have a number of national programs that just focus on community and diversity and a number of issues, and working with them to find out, what do you want us to do? What would you like us to see us do? And part of what they're saying is, grow small businesses, those types of things, create some diversity within the workforce, and not only your workforce, but the teams that you're working with. So I think it just comes down to people that want to see it happen. And think of it beyond the numbers, beyond checking the boxes. And when you have those people, and they're out there, believe me, they're definitely out there. You need to connect with folks, like Jennifer and Miguel, but also just make sure that you're giving them something that they can be proud of, and feel good at the end of their day that they did some good work for the community and minority and women businesses. So that's it's about attitude.
I appreciate that, Tony. And I think from the role of leading DEI or inclusivity or supplier diversity, whatever that title may be, is a great place to start. But also know that there's people within organizations that are those advocates that Tony's mentioning and describing, right? That there's people that do care about growing businesses, but also growing our regional economy, growing our communities as a whole throughout. I can speak candidly throughout plenary, and I believe throughout many other organizations in this industry as well.
Miguel, are you talking?
Oh gosh, I always do this. Thank you.
So do we
Leslie.
all.
Thank you. Thank you. To Jennifer and Tony's point, it is beyond checking the box, at least it should be. I think that's where agencies have a role in when they put out those solicitation documents. Are we just collecting numbers of participation and commitments, or are we requesting plans, outreach strategies, mentorship plans along with that? And are we putting evaluation points to those plans? Bad ones don't get the points, good ones do. Simple as that. It makes a difference. I will tell you that from an agency perspective, every time we feel we can't do something as a requirement, we make it voluntary. And we put it in the solicitation. And every time we make it voluntary, most players, I would say 99.9%, agree to do what we made voluntary within the proposal, and they submit the plan with it, and they're all eligible for the evaluation points. I'm assuming it's because everyone wants to keep that competitive edge. That's probably what I would do. It's what I did when I was in the private sector. So there are creative ways for agencies to do this. I would also say that diversity within diversity is important. You can't just look at like raw numbers and say we have 70% minority participation on construction and say that's diverse if 60% of it comes from one group. So you really have to look at diversity within diversity and break that out. At Metro, we do break that out by ethnicity and gender and report on it. One thing that we also do at Metro, which you would think would be against Prop 209, but our county council says it's not. But we do grade contractors on their female utilization on our large PLA contracts. So if they're meeting the federal executive order 11246 goal, which isn't high, it's 6.9%. Doesn't mean they get an A, but it means they score closer to an A. If they're not, they automatically go to a B or C, and we post those grades on our website. So maybe not the incentive that Lance was asking about, but the disincentive to not get, that reputation as someone who's not taking our goals seriously is a way that agencies look at this as well.
My question is we keep talking about goals and what's next for goals. I know that internally in my organization, we've had that conversation of, we would all love to get to a point, someday where we don't have this conversation, and that we don't have a need to have Encompass, and we don't have a need to have these programs. What do you feel that point would be?
Leslie, I definitely don't think we're there, and I can tell you why I say
well,
that.
We're definitely not there. We know that.
Yeah, and I can tell you why exactly. We have the data to prove it. On the DBE side, when the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals in the Washington State case said that public agencies had to prove disparity by each individual minority group and for women in order to set goals for those groups, they made everyone goal race neutral. So basically your goals were not goals. There was no good faith efforts around them. They were just suggested participation, but not enforceable. Metro was in that scenario for a while, and our participation completely dropped. So if we didn't have those goals, we know that our participation drops. We lived it because of that court case. We did our disparity study. And the disparity study found the disparity for all the historically underutilized groups and for women, and we were able to bring back goals. When we brought back goals, our participation went up again. So it's something that we all knew that we weren't there yet. It's just the data at Metro proved it in terms of what happens if you don't have these aggressive goals. I will tell you that at Metro, in addition to kind of growing our SB primes, all our goals have been going up. I remember maybe back in 2012, our DBE participation goal was about 12%, then it went to 17, then 19, then 23, and now it's at 27, and we're developing the current goal right now. Our small business participation overall goal is 30%. Agencies are also looking at medium size goals and those programs. That's something that we're trying to figure out. We were one of the first agencies to develop a medium size program set aside. And the reason we wanted that is we kept on hearing the concern that historically underutilized business, once they graduated from whatever certification program that they were under, that they stopped getting work as subcontractors or as primes even, because their participation didn't count towards the goal. So the medium size is and we're not quite there yet. That program still needs a lot of tweaks in order, I think, to make it what we want it to be. But the goal of the program is to have a place for these firms to land when they graduate from the small business program. So they don't need the small business program and they don't fall back into it if they don't want to. If they don't want to, there are some firms who like that niche size, and that's completely okay. That's what the program is there for. There are others that don't like that niche size. I received a comment yesterday from someone, is this firm pre-qualified? They're operating out of their garage. And I reminded them that, didn't Apple start in a garage? And didn't all these other firms start in a garage? You know, so everyone starts somewhere. But having that place for them to land and have them to, you know, giving them at least a place to land temporarily while they continue to grow, I think is important. So that's something that we're looking at closely. Mentorship protege programs. I think Tony is the one who said it. Just participation isn't enough. Just using them isn't enough. What are you doing to grow their capacity of the firm? How are you helping them? Not doing the work for them. That would bring up a whole lot of other issues. But what are you doing to help that firm grow and get more work is something that we're looking at very closely here at Metro as well.
And to some extent, I mean, you know, the larger firms are growing their future competitors, and you know, being able, like I was able with my firm, you know, to be in a prime joint venture with major firms is part of that evolution about where minority women firms, small businesses get to. Being able to do that. I mean, I remember another time when we were trying to get on a team for the LA Community College District in some of their project management. And you know, we were doing all the things we needed to do and networking and going to the pre-proposals and all of that fun stuff. And we were having difficulty getting on a team. And what ended up happening is, and you know, a friend of mine who also has a minority ownership in a business, we were sitting there at the pre-proposal meeting and feeling frustrated by not being able to get on a team. We started talking out on the sidewalk after the meeting and said, hey, let's form our own team. And so we created a joint venture and an entity as a prime consultant, and won a very, very good contract. One of the colleges, we became the project manager at LA Trade Tech College. And so I think that there is an evolution that needs to happen, but we have to think in an entrepreneurial manner. And just because, you know, the big guys won't let us in the door doesn't mean that we cannot participate, and that we have a place as professionals, architects and engineers to be able to do this work ourselves. And again, that's a buildup of competence and delivering, you know, a history of delivering. And all of this comes from the startup with a large team. And so there is an evolution to that. I think that there are some milestones that kind of happen along the way. You know, one of those would be when we are, when that small firm gets beyond just being an ethnic firm, we start off small and we connect within our own sort of ethnic group. But when those firms start to move into hiring a diverse group within that firm itself, that's a milestone that changes, the image of a small business minority firm into a larger entity. And so I think that is part of what still has to happen. There has to, we have to take control of our own business destinies. And I think that is something, when I talk about being in business versus being an architect, that's what I'm talking about, and looking to grow. And so we can then be able to create our own meeting goals as a prime consultant. So we're not there yet, as we all understand, but I think that we have to think about it as in an entrepreneurial sense, in a business sense, and let's, one of the things that I was concerned about in being a sub-consultant and a MBE, DBE, was that you're never leading the project. And so, so that is something that, you get on a team and you have a niche, and whatever that niche may be on the team, but you're in a role in which you are directed by a larger entity, a prime entity. So, we need to get beyond that. And we have to think about what we do to competently deliver contracts and projects. So I think that we're not there yet, but we have to think big, even when we're small.
Last year, I hosted a training event called Community of Inclusion Equity Symposium. It was an internal training for my previous employer. And one of our speakers was Dr. Fred McKinney. He's a MBE advocate and has a lot of accolades that I could spend a lot of time sharing about him. But one of the things that was so impactful was a particular screen or slide in his deck that showed the evolution of America. It was very simple, but very effective. It took the speedometer from Makar, and it said, okay, from 1600s to late 1800s, we had slavery, right? And it served indentured servitude. And then for another 100 years plus, we had Jim Crow. And then we had the Civil Rights era. And when it got to, and I don't know if you can see my fingers moving along the dial, but when it got to the current period or phase, it was very small slice, a sliver that we think, or some of us think we're in a colorblind society and everything's great. And it really put in perspective that timepiece and how the history of our country really has been a slow evolution to that place where maybe sometime in the future we won't need goals. That would be fantastic if at some point it was just based on, quality and capabilities and we didn't have this film over our eyes where there's maybe a preference towards unbiased or unconscious, however it may be, that film is removed and we can do this colorblind society. I don't think we're there yet. I think if Metro and whoever else lifted their and changed the program back to race and gender neutral, we'll see that dip again that Miguel talked about. So that's why I think those programs are so important to keep in place at this time. But I also see a lot of value in that medium-sized business to program where there's a pathway for growth or for the utilities perspective, where there is no size standard, and where there's a consideration of minority, women, LGBT, disabled, veteran-owned businesses as part of their supplier diversity program at any size. I think that's really empowering, to be able to not have to feel like you gotta stay under a certain revenue cap. There's somewhat of a unintended consequence with those dollar thresholds. So I think going back and thinking about the history and in real terms and what the reality is, we still got a lot of work to go forward. And I think these programs are still going to be important and necessary for quite some time as we grow as a society and evolve.
Yeah, it seems like we're currently kind of disincentivizing the growth. And that's really not the goal. Our company should be as big as anybody else's if we so choose, but still there would be that need for the recognition that they're, regardless of how big they are, they're still disadvantaged in certain sectors. We are just at that time. We're actually on time. I want to give everybody an opportunity to have some final words. So Jennifer, start with you.
First, I would say thank you again for inviting me to participate and to join all of you in this conversation. It's been really great connecting with the panelists and yourself, Leslie, as a moderator, but also hearing and seeing in the chat the other participants. And I'm glad that AIA and Noma came together to create this entity and this opportunity to have these conversations and candidly. And I'm looking forward to seeing how we evolve as a society and get more integrated and purposeful about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And from the plenary perspective, I'm so excited about what's on the horizon for P3 industry and how we can really make meaningful impact with our partners.
Thank you. Tony?
Well, I want to thank you again, Leslie and Noma and AIA for having us participate. It's a very important discussion. I want to end with letting people know that now is the time to energize. Now is the time to be aggressive because of the Biden administration's infrastructure plan. There is an incredible amount of opportunity today, and that will be hitting us as this money comes into the the agencies or whomever. We all need to get more involved. I mean, as a large firm, I can tell you, we already have projects lined up on infrastructure, and so you all need to look at what is ahead of us, and it is going to be a very opportune time to grow your business, to get to the level that you want to be at. You have to be competent. You have to deliver. You can't be a firm that gets an MBE or WBE contract and doesn't deliver, because that's what we want, because there are competitors that do deliver, and those are the ones that we kind of gravitate to. But today we are on the cusp of an economic growth, and you all need to be prepared the same way that the larger businesses are preparing. And so get out there, network, talk to prime firms, contractors, financiers, all those types. So this should be a time when you have to prepare the fundamentals of networking, of getting prepared for being included on teams or creating your own teams. So it's an encouraging time now, and we've gone through this very negative kind of dormant stage over the past year because of COVID and other social issues that we've had to deal with. But from an entrepreneurial standpoint, from a business standpoint, now is the time. Now is the time to get involved with your future clients, your former clients, and within the AEC community. So that's what I want to leave everyone with, that get on board now, and it's the time is soon going to be coming where those opportunities are going to be there for everyone.
Thank you, Tony. Miguel.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you again to AIA and Noma for the invite, and you, Leslie, and the audience for your thoughtful questions on this area, and of course to my co-panelists for a great discussion. As Tony said, the time is now. At Metro, it's been there for a while. So we need you. I'm going to do a selfish plug. We need you. We have aggressive goals at Metro, and they don't give us an option but to meet those goals in terms of what we do as the diversity, equity, and inclusion staff at Metro. So I would encourage all of you to come to Metro, get to know us, come to our monthly workshops, which are the second Tuesday of the month. Hopefully I said that right, or TBAC, which we talked about earlier, which is the first Thursday of the month. We bring our C-suite executives, project managers, our planning folks, our procurement folks to those meetings. My staff is there and run those meetings. So get to know us, get to know how we do business. I'm just going to throw this address out there one more time, this hyperlink, metro.net/connect. If you go there, it will send you to a link to all our calendar of events. It will take you to our solicitations page, to our look ahead. But yeah, just a selfish plug. We want to be the agency of choice, and we need you to help us get there. So come work for Metro.
Thank you all. I think that this took the conversation forward. I think that I hope that people got good information, good insight, thoughts about what's next. So I think we were supposed to have a break, but we're a little bit over. So I am going to throw this to Janelle and the panel on DEI in the community. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I am Janelle Brooks, a member of the JEDI committee and a board member for SoCal Noma. And what our panel is DEI in the community. We've taken the time to talk to architects and other design professionals, contractors, and get a sense of what's happening in the industry. And we thought that this would be a great opportunity to talk to people outside of architecture to discuss their interactions with diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and to see how we can learn from the things that they're doing, their successes, their lessons, and hopefully gain some insight that can be useful within our industry. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, and hopefully we can get everybody pinned onto the screen, and then they can give us a little more information about who they are and what they do before we get into our conversation. So we have Anthony Jolly, Tony, from Hot and Cool, a cafe based in Leimert Park. He's the owner of that coffee shop and what I call community center, as well as another in the Valley, Hot and Cool North. Jason Foster, who's the president and COO of Destination Crenshaw, which most of us are familiar with. Candy Lewis, who is the CEO of the Positive Results Center. Mark Horvath, founder of Invisible People, and Vincent Jones, CEO and Chief Strategist of Citizen Jones Consulting. I will get started, if we can, from the bottom with the panelists giving us your own introduction. Vincent?
Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, excuse me, everyone. My name is Vincent Jones, and I'm a consultant. I work with a number of organizations that are working to advance change, typically progressive change, in Los Angeles, in California, the country, and the world. And some of the ways that we work to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in my team are really helping organizations to do the work internally. It's really about culture shift. And so that's a big part of our work. We're working with do you want me to go further at this point in some of give one example or just stop at that?
One would be great.
Okay.
Vince is very engaged.
So one example is working with the California Democratic Party to create a very comprehensive justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion initiative that really acknowledges the fact that the party is not a one organization. There are many different layers that are wholly separate, but are totally connected. So trying to create the systems and support for culture change to happen at every single level, but to still be moving in the same direction towards the common goal. That's one example. And I'm happy to be here with so many friends and other good people in the audience.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm moving on my screen. Mark Horvath is next.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much. I am honored and encouraged and probably excited, not probably, I am excited to learn. I am the founder of Invisible People. We're the only education-based nonprofit working to end homelessness through storytelling. We have a very large YouTube audience. We do mini documentaries, first-person interviews, new video journalism. We also do daily news, original reporting on homelessness and related topics. We're the only nonprofit newsroom focused solely on homelessness. And we're also on Apple News and Google News. So if you have an iPhone or an Android, you can find us on your phone or on your desktop. And we also are very active in educating young adults about homelessness. And we have a very robust advocacy platform for state and federal. I mean, advocacy needs to happen at the local level, but also state and federal. At the local level, everybody's different. State and federal, we just got to keep the pressure on.
Awesome. Next on my screen is Candy Lewis.
Good morning, everyone. I am Candy, CEO of Positive Results Center. We address trauma from a cultural and age perspective. We are a premier authority on healthy relationships, violence prevention, and that includes dating, domestic and interpersonal violence, sexual assault, and bullying. And I want to tell you that every single one of you knows someone who has been affected by those concerns. And what we do is we work with youth and young adults to help them to understand that they are not what has happened to them, but they are so much more. And we also work with educators and providers of youth serving agencies to help them to understand the trauma that people of color have experienced and how they may show up. Very often, people will assume that because you come from a certain area or you've experienced this, that you should be this way. But we help them to understand really how to work with and get the best out of people. We are currently in a series called Advancing Social Justice and Equity, Opportunities and Possibilities for BIPOC Communities, to help the world look at what people of color are experiencing, the value that they bring to the table, and how we can work collectively to end violence, abuse, and really to bring forth equity in all communities. That's a little bit about us.
It's a lot. Thank you. And I have Jason Foster, a fellow Bison, and
Yeah, you know. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Foster. I'm the president and COO of Destination Crenshaw. Destination Crenshaw is a 1.3-mile cultural infrastructure project on Crenshaw Boulevard between Slauson and Vernon. I really am excited about this conversation to really expand DEI. Let's add an R word. Let's redistribute funds. Let's reclaim communities for Black and Brown people. Let's repair communities through architecture that actually shows our intrinsic value and how much we love ourselves and each other. I'm excited about this conversation to hopefully expand the allyship to actual action.
Awesome. We will introduce Tony Jolly when we can get him on the screen. And hopefully that'll be sooner than later. So everyone is given a snippet of the work that you're doing and the objective, the primary organizations that each of you is a leader in. And I wanted to get a little further into the nuances of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to have each of you speak to which part you find that you engage in most, and which ones you feel are most valuable to progressing your mission. Anyone jump in there? All right, I'm calling names. Jason?
Yeah, so, mine is equity. I think Destination Crenshaw, we're trying to accomplish equity outside for Black people in Los Angeles, which means you get to live in it, you get to experience it, you get to know how it feels to be in a safe space that is welcoming to you. And I actually think that an equitable space for Black people has not been accomplished yet. So that is the exciting part about the work that we're doing at Destination Crenshaw, is to not only think about design and infrastructure, but really, how do we really help small businesses? How do we help people in the community actually benefit from this project and ultimately change our orientation to change? Because, when we're talking about design, equitable design means that people are okay with it. So when it happens, it's not, modern Nordic design that has the steel area numbers that exactly where that fence came from and why it's there. But design that actually has notes of African descent in it, notes of your community, things that you care about in the design and in the thought process. So we're hoping that the Destination Crenshaw project can accomplish equity for South LA.
Something that we tapped on yesterday in a conversation in one of the panels yesterday is identifying a Black architectural aesthetic, and something that Damar Matthews is, really digging into, along with other people, obviously in Watts specifically with a project that they're working on. Mark, diversity, equity, inclusion. Which one do you feel like your work is impacting or aims to impact?
I would say equity as far as programs, but we're very conscious of diversity at the board level and the writers that we hire. To explain that is, people of color are overly represented in homelessness. And that's where we have to really work on diversity. But in equity, we run some online support groups for homeless people, and also in our communications and what we do externally, we're more equity focused. It's, if you were to go to the DNA of our work, it's everybody should be treated the same. Everybody, regardless of ... doesn't matter. Everybody should be treated the same. So in our programs, equity, as far as our, organizational structure and leadership board, we have to always make diversity a priority.
Absolutely. Welcome, Tony. If you can.
Apologize. Growing pains of a small business owner.
and you're here, so wonderful. Just to take it back for a second, I want to introduce Tony Jolly, owner of Hot and Cool Cafe and Hot and Cool North in the Valley. And if you could just give us a little something about yourself, any more than that if you'd like, and then we'll get back into the question.
Okay. Yeah, Tony Jolly, and owner of Hot and Cool Cafe in Leimert Park. And we recently just opened up Hot and Cool North, tagged by Janelle, who was instrumental in helping us open our second location. I am a coffee professional, originally from DC, and my path brought me to Leimert Park about 4 years ago to open up Hot and Cool Cafe. And it had its 3rd year anniversary yesterday. We came in to provide specialty coffee into a demographic that normally doesn't have that luxury unless it looks like gentrification. There's not many African Americans in my field. I go to specialty coffee conferences across the world, and it's just me and probably the African farmer. When I was in Ethiopia working on farms at the agricultural level, you know, they've never seen an African American come into their space. And so, you know, we wanted to bring, you know, the culture of a specialty coffee shop that exemplifies community into a demographic that needed community to rally during this time. So that led us to open up Hot and Cool Cafe. And you know, my specialty coffee concept went out the window because it was a hungry demographic, literally. They wanted healthy food. I remember moving into Leimert Park and wanted to get something to eat that I like, and it was kind of hard to find something healthy. So we pivoted. We decided to feed the community, and man, have we fed the community. So we kind of, we're now a vegan cafe. During the pandemic, we fed senior citizens through a program led by Marquise Harris Dawson in District 8. We went on and we adopted seniors as well. And we fed over the last year about 7,000 meals to the community. So, you know, our business model is, I think it's a 72-page business plan. I think we tapped into 5 pages. And we pivoted to be a part of the community. We can't be a part of the community and not be active. So that's what Hot and Cool is. And I guess that's who we are.
Awesome. So for at least 3 of the panelists, I've had some work engagement. And hopefully with the others, we'll find some way to help each other's missions. But I said before you joined, Tony, that you have a coffee shop, but it's a community center. And I think that you have tapped into why that is so. And the need was there, and we appreciate you. He's in my neighborhood. So the question was diversity, equity, inclusion. Which one do you feel like your efforts tap into? Which do you feel is most valuable, useful? And we'll keep you on the floor, Tony.
Okay. Diversity, equity, or inclusion. I think we kind of tap into all of that in some way. You know, during the pandemic, we let go some people, but we hired back in June, and we refused to let them go. We've been running in the red just to give these young people a job, and it was hard for us to let them go. And sure, they can go on unemployment and sit back, but when you're in Hot and Cool Cafe, you're part of something, and we need hope in this time. So, you know, we wanted to give them a piece. You know, we wanted to make sure that they can get up and have purpose. So to be included into the workforce right now is important, because once things kick back in, you know, those who have been living the luxury life of unemployment, it's going to be hard to find your way. You know, and, you know, yes, I think that that is something that we really hang our hat on, being able to employ 8 young people, you know, between the ages of, my youngest is 17, between the ages of 17 and 29, and give them the ability to grow within our space.
Awesome. Awesome. Candy, DEI, which one?
Definitely inclusion. We don't see enough of ourselves anywhere. What we do see is all of the negative stereotypes. But as Black people, we are phenomenal. We are intelligent. We are resourceful. We're just not given the opportunity to show those things. And Jason gave his R. Let me give you 2 R's. Radically reimagine. We need to radically reimagine what the world would look like, what the community would look like if we had more Tony Jollies, more Jasons, more Vincents, more Marks, more Candies, and more of all of you together. And so we know we're living in a pandemic, but let me put this to you. We're actually living in 4 pandemics. We're living in the pandemic of COVID-19. We're living in the pandemic of violence against Black people. We're living in the pandemic of housing insecurity. And we're also living in the pandemic of economic insecurity. Because of COVID-19, all of those things were really elevated. And so we're right now working with kids, people, adults who have been systematically abused. Racism, sexism, and violence has really just been something that we've lived through. The word people have been using was post-traumatic stress disorder. That's not true. We are in continued traumatic stress disorder. We've never left it. So when we are in our homes, we're dealing with violence inside of our home. We step outside of our homes and we're dealing with community violence. And then we are showing up the best that we can, and people are looking at us and assuming that you're a gang member or you're a drug addict or you don't want to work. And that is not the case. We simply want to have an equal playing field. We've never had an equal playing field, and because of COVID-19, the field completely disappeared. So how can we bring forth the beauty and the value that we bring, but have a playing field that we can even operate on? And so my word is definitely inclusion. We want to participate. We want to be part of the solution. But in order to be part of the solution, we have to have people that are working with us to create the solutions, because not everyone is, what's the word? I think too many of us are underrepresented. We're underrepresented, undervalued, and underappreciated. So I'll leave it right there for a minute.
Okay. And Vincent, you touch on so many parts of this subject in your work. And so which do you feel is most valuable, and what parts of your work speak to diversity, equity, or inclusion?
So I often think about it as I mentioned the JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think that justice is the goal, and diversity, equity, and inclusion are like the drivers to get there. And I think when you by including people, by including the right people at the table, you're able to start to get to solutions that actually speak to a community, and you actually to be able to have a better chance at getting toward an equitable outcome, where it is. It's not just, it's more about being aware of what the different needs are, but also being aware of like how you can meet those different needs. Because it's not about treating everybody the same per se, because people have different needs, but by treating them, giving them the tools they need to be able to succeed and to thrive in that community. And that, to me, and the collection of all that is justice. Because, you know, like about decision-making, representation, the resources and support, that all leads towards justice. And that's really what my focus is on. Because also you have to, it's not about the people who are there at that time. Also, you know, there are not everyone can be a part of a process for a variety of reasons, but you have to still be able to make sure you have processes for those people who are not at the table to be there in some kind of way, virtually, spiritually, emotionally, through data or whatever else. And when you're able to do all of that, you achieve justice. That's what I focus on.
Amazing. I want to ask, and this might tap into more personal things, what motivated you to do the work that you do?
Well, Candy.
What motivated me to do the work are my children. So I have 3 beautiful, amazing, smart, talented children. And this might trigger some people, but one day when my child was young, my oldest daughter, she looked at me and she asked me, why was I light-skinned? Okay, now look at me. Am I light-skinned? Absolutely not. And I have these beautiful children who are the color of the moon or excuse me, of the midnight sky. And because people bullied this child because of the color of her skin and because she is brilliant, and they wanted to, when you were in trauma, let me digress for a second, but when you are in trauma and you've experienced violence, you want other people to feel your pain, especially if you see them succeeding. You don't want them to succeed because you're not succeeding. And no one has taught certain people how to advance and realize where they're gifted. We all have gifts. We all have talents. But if we've not been told that, if we've been told that we're stupid, dumb, and ugly all our life, that is what we become and that is what we believe. And so because of the pain and the abuse that my child experienced on a daily basis by people who looked like her, as well as people who didn't look like her, I felt it was really something that I needed to do. And then prior to doing this work, I was in corporate America. I was a sales hiring and training manager. And in 2007, I was the interim president of a technology company. And we always hired youth and young adults between 17 to 25. That was before we knew that they were called TAY, Transitional Age Youth. And I kept wondering, why can't I hire enough of the young people that are coming through? Their skill sets were horrible and they were showing up any kind of way. And so I started working in nonprofits and realized there weren't enough people that looked like them that were showing them what they needed to do to be successful, not to get the job, but to keep the job. To also show them the beauty and the value that is right inside of them. And again, how they are not what has happened to them. And so it is because of my child and other people who look like me, not having the opportunities, not realizing that they have the potential right inside of themselves. That is what caused me to do this work. And we've been very successful. For instance, some of the things that we do, when we first started, there were children, and there's still kids who don't know how to read, excuse me, and adults who don't know how to read. So we're not going to pick up a school book. We're going to find out what their interest is. So let's say in this case, they're interested in architectural design or grafting or whatever the case is. We're going to find a magazine, going to give it to them, and we're going to teach them based on what they are most interested in. Find something that a person is interested in, and you can teach them everything that they need. Because people don't want a handout, they want a hand up. They want to learn how can they provide for themselves and their family. And that's really why I started doing this work. And then once we started doing it, I realized that honestly, in Los Angeles County, there's not another agency like ours. We are solely focused on addressing the trauma from the violence that they've experienced, and not gang violence and gun violence, which also impacts what we do, but primarily from the interpersonal violence that they've experienced.
Got it. Mark? What motivated you to do the work you do?
I knew I was going to be next. I should have. I was just, oh my gosh, what you were saying was so awesome. I was deep in it and I should have just unmuted just in preparation. That was awesome. Tough to act to follow. I believe strongly that one of the biggest obstacles to ending homelessness is public just can't relate to it. Most people, and there's a direct connection between what people believe about homelessness and poverty and policy. Most people blame homelessness on the person. They're a drug addict, they're a bum, they're lazy, instead of lack of affordable housing, lack of a living wage, racism, foster care, broken criminal justice system, domestic violence, addiction, mental health. It could be all these things, and yet the public is just, filled with all these misconceptions that have been reinforced for decades. And I want to tell you that I started this work because I wanted to make the world a better place, but if I did that, I would be lying. So I had a great job in the television industry, and I ended up homeless on Hollywood Boulevard. In fact, I used to sell pictures of my iguana to tourists in front of the Chinese theater. So those overweight guys in Spider-Man outfits you see today, I'm sorry. I might have started all that. Please forgive me. But I rebuilt my life back to a 3-bedroom house and a new car in the garage and a pool in the backyard and a cushy marketing job. And in 2008, the economy tanked and I lost everything but my sobriety. And right around 19 months of unemployment, not consecutive, I get a job and get laid off and get a job, I get laid off. I mean, it's similar to what's happening now in the economy, only I think now might be a little worse. I think what Candy said about it being constant, instead of PTSD, that, we're living in this, stress syndrome is very true. But one day I needed purpose to get up in the morning. So deep down, because I lived in a homeless shelter for 7 years. Nobody should live in a homeless shelter for 7 years. And I saw how the voice of people experiencing homelessness or the voice of people experiencing poverty weren't being listened to. And so that was the foundation, but I was really giving myself purpose to get up in the morning. And so I grabbed a camera, a dinky camera, and I went out and I started empowering homeless people to share their own story, raw and unedited. That was kind of the magic because my computer wouldn't edit video. So I almost didn't do it because I'm a television producer by trade, and video has to have B-roll and music and all this. One day I said, you know what, I'm just going to put this up in raw and unedited. And that was the magic. Authenticity has replaced production value. So fast forward to today, I mean, we've worked with Canada and City of Los Angeles and County of Los Angeles, State of Utah, San Francisco, London in the UK to help educate the public about homelessness. And we reach about 10 million to 20 million people a month. And I can't stop because we are the only one in this space. I mean, I'll give you some real examples of why the work is really important. There was a horrible house fire in Venice, and the local NIMBYs have started spreading out in my backyard, started spreading rumors that it was set by a homeless person. And even though Los Angeles Fire Department said there's no evidence of that, this rumor spread to the local news, and it's being populated. And if you look from, this is a conference about architecture, the big thing now is these pallet shelters that are being put in. And yesterday even, and I've been asking the politicians, let's go sleep in one, right? Because if, they're doing creating these environments for vulnerable people, yet they do it without any experience of homelessness or poverty themselves. And these shacks are meant for lawnmowers. And if they were temporary, great. But the bridge shelters, which also failed, only have a, sorry, I got a lot of passion in this area, only have a 15% success rate in the housing. So how are these tiny shacks going to be any different? And I get it. Put one person, they're putting two people in these shacks. And what they're trying to do, and I'll stop right after this, is, you know, there's the Martin versus Boise Supreme Court case where a police officer cannot arrest a homeless person for just being homeless unless they can offer one night shelter bed. So because there's not enough shelter beds, and that's what you're seeing happening with Judge Carter on Skid Row, which tremendously affects the Black and brown communities, they are going to increase shelter beds and then start enforcing the camping ban. And this thinking that we're going to arrest our way out of homelessness when specifically homelessness is growing and is going to continue to grow is just ridiculous. So that's why I do what I do and why I can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, Vincent, you're up.
So in 1992, there was an unjust verdict where Rodney King, where the cops who beat Rodney King were not found guilty, and the city of Los Angeles, where I grew up, erupted. At the time, I lived in Cucamonga and was going to high school there, and I was a co-founder of this club, a diversity club. And people who know me now wouldn't believe this, but I was a shy sophomore in high school, but somehow I got involved with this organization. I think because my teacher was the sponsor. I forget what you call it, the teachers who involved with clubs. But I had a lot of ideas. So they brought together a bunch of students to think through what can we do to keep the peace on campus. And I had a bunch of ideas. So they said, well, Vincent, you should be in charge of this. And I was like, me? I was like, okay. And so we did a bunch of things, had a lot of conversations on campus, and there's a lot of stuff to be able to give. There were a lot of, if you saw the movie Next Friday with Snoop Dogg and Chris Tucker when they moved out to Cucamonga, that was based in reality. A lot of Black families had kind of fled South Los Angeles and the LA area to move to places to get better schooling and whatnot. And so we had a lot of connections to the community. But I remember at the end of the first day, just really reflecting back, was like, wow, there is something about building community and helping people who feel voiceless to have a voice. And that really started me down a path to a kind of community building and community work. I got the scholarship to Swarthmore. I'm not a Bison, but I went to Swarthmore College outside of Philadelphia, a scholarship that basically, I was at 18 years old, I got a $10,000 grant to design a social action project. And I created this program that was in the Philadelphia schools. And it's been kind of continuing that theme in my life throughout ever since. It's just been a driving force within me to always build community, to help us be stronger, more equitable, more inclusive, so at the end we can have justice.
Amazing, amazing. Tony?
Sorry. Yeah, 92 was a year. 93 for me, and just when I kind of entered the coffee space. I worked at Starbucks in DC during the East Coast migration, and I kind of fell in love with the concept of the coffee house because our location was across the street from the courthouse. So I'll see these lawyers every day, 2 doors, and line out the door. And I got to know these guys and women by, their families, their issues. The barista became the new bartender at that time. And it was a community. And, you know, we are a community people, African Americans. We like to get together and barbecue and talk and laugh. And I saw that in the coffee house. And so that made me fall in love. Sorry, coffee's being made as we speak. And so as I got deep into my profession, you know, the demographics of those who drink coffee aren't African Americans. It's predominantly white. And I was going to open up our first shop in San Francisco just to seek out that demographic. And I had a mentor who told me, it was like, yo, Black people drink coffee too. And I was like, yeah, you're right. And but most importantly, you need to open up a shop in an area where they don't normally see an African American doing this type of business. And that community that led you to coffee, you need to build that community within your walls over a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. He spoke like, you know, when you sit down and have a cup of coffee or tea or something with someone in a space, you start to engage, you start to go further in conversation, you start to stretch upon yourself. Two people coming together in the space allows growth. And so he was adamant that I go to Leimert Park in particular and provide that space. It's, you know, specialty coffee shops can be intimidating for African Americans and people of color. You know, typically they're not guided on what's good and what's not and how to participate. You know, we wanted to break the ice, so to speak. We wanted to be a space where people can come in and learn about I'm a foodie, so different foods and different herbs that they're not used to and feel comfortable. And then, you know, once people start to intake healthy goods, they sit down in our space, and we made our space aesthetically pleasing. It is the people's space. And so the theory was that, you know, growth can happen. And it did. And people sat down. I don't know how many meetings, I don't know how many ideas have come into fruition out of Hot and Cool, but our goal was to provide that space for our people can come and have a safe space. And we opened right around the time that Starbucks called the police on those young boys in Philly. So there was a huge surge of looking for a safe space to grow and to connect for African Americans. So that's why we opened up Hot and Cool in Leimert Park.
Awesome. And how'd you get into the space, Jason?
So, I mean, I don't know how I'm supposed to follow all these amazing stories. First of all, I just want to thank each of the panelists for sharing. You know, I think for me, when I was at Howard, I was studying finance. And up until the recession, I was really studying money, stock markets, bonds, investments. And while I was in this place where everyone was feeling welcomed and just fed with love, my parents lost their home. And a doctor and an engineer who have lived their life to provide the best life for their 4 kids actually were unstable. So while I was in this loving environment where everything was going great, we were, you know, partying and celebrating, I was doing internships, my family was really going through a very difficult time. And it made me think about what I was studying. Like, was I studying money, or was I studying how I felt about money? How I felt about how these things made me feel, and what that feeling meant for me and my community. Because, you know, after that, you know, it was really an easy choice not to work on Wall Street, but to really move back home, you know, try to stabilize my family and my community. I started working in a nonprofit. So I have been a nonprofit ever since. So I was really looking at, you know, working from young people from after the juvenile delinquency system. I started an after school program because people know that like most of the crimes with young people happen after school because they don't have anything to do until their parents get home. And my parents were the parents coming home at 8, 9 o'clock, right? So I understand that lifestyle. And then I moved, you know, to New York. where it was around studying affordability, and really thinking about, affordable housing, writing policy, doing crisis management. But all these things really made me think about the orientation of the work that I was trying to do and what best served me and my background. So I wanted to get ahead of these changes, right? Like I wanted to start thinking about home in a holistic sense. And for me, that meant infrastructure. So when I moved to Los Angeles, I had an opportunity to work with River LA. They focus on 51 miles of the Los Angeles River and the 17 municipalities along the river. It's a generational project that's trying to change culture, not habits. And I feel like that's what kind of led me to the Destination Crenshaw project, because it is ultimately an infrastructure project. Infrastructure is at the highest level of privilege. It allows you to dictate how people live and move within their spaces. And that's why we're seeing the federal push to right the wrongs of the past, because the people that were doing those kind of systemic changes to oppress people of color, they knew that, right? Like they built highways to really separate communities, to dictate how people were actually getting from here to there. And I feel like it is time now, as it was said before, these pandemics actually allowed people to understand what Destination Crenshaw is, right? And that is the resilience of Black people in a nutshell. It takes crisis for people to even understand what we are talking about. And I think, getting people to understand that, getting to people to understand our orientation as, me, a light-skinned Black man that played tennis from Knoxville, Tennessee. Yeah, I was absolutely challenged of my Blackness every single day from both Black people and white people. But it is me knowing that home is where I am. It is why I have headphones on, because my wife is next to me and she is working at home, right? Like that is what we are trying to do, is we are trying to create spaces where we can all be safe and understood. And I think that that is ultimately, why I'm in the work I'm in today, because I understand that money is only a feeling. And if we can provide a feeling of safety around us, then we don't need cops. Right? Like we don't need to defund the cops if we feel safe. Right. And I think that ultimately, like that is, what my parents were trying to provide for me, getting me to Howard. And that's ultimately what I'm trying to provide for all the families in South LA. So they don't have to go through what I went through with that disconnect.
Awesome. Awesome. So there are a few things that I am hearing, and I hope other people are getting in common threads, even though each of our panelists comes from a different angle. And I want to get into some of the tactics or initiatives that you all work on, and you feel like they have positively impacted diversity, equity, or inclusion, the one that you feel like your mission is most concerned with, and the ones that you feel were not as effective. How can we learn as an industry from, like I said, all of these different angles that you all work, and really get a sense of the things that you believe worked and did not work in specific initiatives?
I'll start. So all of our programs have worked. And the reason that they've worked is because, first off, I live, work, and worship in my community. I am my community. My family is my community. But because we work with youth and young adults, and although I am very youthful, I am not their age. And so we bring in, when we're going to do a program, we will bring in the people that we're going to service, and we talk to them. We ask them, what do they want? What do they need? What are their concerns? Because as a beautiful senior woman, my concerns may be different from a 19-year-old's, and they're going to definitely be different from a 14-year-old. And so we will always not only work with them, we will include them in all of the work that we do, and we even have them on our advisory board. So that's why our programs work. And some of the things that we've done is we have a very robust youth leadership program. And in this youth leadership program, we cover everything that they need. That includes our first session is always on self-assessment and discovery. Who are you as opposed to who everyone else says you are? The police say you're a gang member. Your family may say you're stupid. The community may say you'll never amount to SHIT, but that's not who they are. That's what they say about them. And then we talk about respect, team building, healthy relationships, violence prevention, effective communication, conflict resolution. Those things have all worked. And then what really works is once we train them, we don't train them so that they know. We train them so that they are able to train other people. So it's that peer education that really, really works. We also know that we are very talented people, and sometimes we may not have the words to communicate what our concerns are. So we do a lot of social emotional learning, and that is usually through art. That includes writing, music, painting, anything that they, in a way that they'll be able to communicate what their concerns are. And then again, we bring them to the community so that they can share. One of the things that we did last year, because we couldn't be directly engaged with people in person, we set up and we watched for about 2 weeks. We are researchers. In order to really be effective, you've got to research everything. You've got to research who your people are, what the community needs are. And so we realized that no one was addressing the emotional and mental health. They were focused on food insecurity and housing insecurity, which are critical. Don't get me wrong, they're critical. But while we're dealing with that, what about their emotional needs? What about their mental health needs, which is going to impact if they're going to even be able to navigate living in a space or a place. And so we did a whole year from April until December 17th. Every single week, we had at least one, if not two, virtual sessions where we talked about trauma. People weren't thinking about when they got their COVID snacks on March 14th and said, oh, I got my COVID snacks and COVID drinks for a whole month. And at the end of the week, their hair was over their head. And they were like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I just drank up a whole month worth of liquor and I ate all my food and my kids are driving me crazy. What they didn't realize, that was called stress. That was depression. That was the trauma that was sitting in. So we did trauma workshops, awareness workshops on everything from your babies to, was it really safer living at home? There were news articles all over the place where people had their Zooms on and people were being sexually assaulted in front of the camera because we didn't stop to think about the violence that people were experiencing. Teachers were saying, turn your cameras on, when they didn't want to turn their cameras on because they had a situation at home that wasn't healthy. And so we also looked at the fact that, like all last year, we're thinking like everyone is great. We're having these Zoom conversations and our agencies were saying, we're giving out laptops and we're giving out free internet. But if you didn't have a laptop and you didn't have internet, how did you know that this was actually happening? So we had people that just didn't know. And so what we do is we make sure that the community is informed and engaged. And we do that in person, we do that virtually, we do it in any kind of way possible. So those are just a couple of things. It is important that you bring in the people that you want to serve and ask them what their needs are. Don't pretend like you know, because you might think you do, but very often you're going to miss it.
Yeah. I want to lean to Jason. I have, we're familiar with Destination Crenshaw and know that it is developing and has been developing. Mm-hmm. And not only do I want to get a sense of the ways that is developing and that you feel that it could be successful and beneficial in reaching the goals that we know that project to have. I'd also like you to touch on the speculation or criticism that Destination Crenshaw could possibly accelerate gentrification as opposed to, holding a place or being an antidote to it.
Sure. So I'll address the first one, or the second one first, right? And a lot of times when I have conversations with them, I ask, first, what is your definition of gentrification? I feel like a lot of times people are using their kind of personal definition. And then I let them know that I'm not debating about improvement. I believe that we deserve the best community possible for us and our people. So if we are debating around, do we want the community to get better or not? I'm not going to have that conversation with you, because to me, yes, we are trying to create the absolute best community for Black people so that we can actually finally have a space that represents us. Now, is Destination Crenshaw creating displacement of our people because of this improvement? I would say no, because we have a 70% local hire, which is unprecedented for a project like this. We have designed our own PLA, our project labor agreement, which traditionally does not happen. We are working with all 43 businesses along the corridor, as well as the other 100 or so up to Exposition on Crenshaw Boulevard, to be able to have ample access to public funds, programs that are happening with other corporate entities and private entities, as well as creating partnerships like a super bid, so to speak, to make sure that each of these businesses has an opportunity to participate, because we know that our Black businesses are actually our Black employers. So the health of our businesses are actually the health of the community itself. And we're also, we're a marketing agency for the Crenshaw Corridor. We want people to know that we are here, right? And we're trying to create a holistic ecosystem that actually encapsulates the economic impact that comes from this project. So we're not only going to invest dollars in creating the project, but we're investing dollars to make sure that the community residents actually have a tangible benefit of this project to their pockets. And I think that is actually something that is revolutionary for our project. That is the redistribution that I was talking about earlier, because we want to make sure that people are actually, benefiting and participating, but also they can withstand change. Because ultimately, if we see change as a bad thing for us, that is something that never goes away. And that is not Destination Crenshaw driving that is time. So our job is really to change the orientation to change for Black community in South LA, and hopefully create a model for other places, for other communities of color that are also dealing with change as a struggle, right? Because, I feel like in my, really career in affordability, because I talk about it as affordability and not necessarily as community development or building or all these things. It is every community is dealing with the same thing. So the east side of Knoxville, Brooklyn, Fort Greene, Southeast DC, they're all dealing with the same thing. Are these developments and improvements for me? And I think that, we want our community and the community wants to be able to participate in what Tony's got going on. But if they're struggling to get a career, if they're struggling to get, jobs that pay a livable wage, if they are not earning more than they're spending, then they can't. And I think that, that holistic approach to community development is capable at the infrastructure level. So, when I talk to people about the changes that are coming in the community, their concerns are valid, because change has not worked out for us as a people for generations. But we're looking to change that, and we're taking those concerns and building solutions out of them and moving them forward.
And we want, as a business owner and resident of that community, I'm sure, and sharing in Tony's interest as well, wanting this thing to be successful for the business owners and for holding place for us in the community that I know, for me anyway, my family has been in Leimert Park since the 40s. So, you know, that place holding is something that's very valuable. And we'll swing it to Tony, who I know has done, you know, I'm sure I only know a piece of the initiatives that you all have done as a business, which is an interesting position. So I'd like you not to just talk about some of the initiatives that you have executed, but also when we talk about businesses and their need to be profitable, how do those initiatives or decisions impact your business?
That's a great question. You know, sometimes I gotta come home late when my wife's asleep, so I don't have to justify some of the spending that we put towards our social programming. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to be a for-profit business serving a community out of our own dime without any partnership. I had no intention on being that entity. You know, I came in with a business concept with projections like most businesses, and you know, with an idea of doing business within the community. But then you see that there's a lot of need, and what do? You know, we've overextended ourselves into the community, and most recently I questioned it. You know, full disclosure, last year, for example, the Juneteenth festival that happened in Leimert, you know, Hot and Cool invested all the money for it, and after that we invested into programming into the community by having outdoor concerts. And once again, as I mentioned, hiring and keeping employees on when we couldn't afford it. And, you know, I questioned all of that last month, and like, you know, what are you doing? Like, you know, like Jason could attest, like when you study a business in the stock market and you want to invest, you're looking at their revenue and their earnings and how much money you're holding. And I look at my business and was like, yo, like it didn't look pretty. But I asked myself, what do you do? You know, how do you transition and then be more about your numbers and your projections and meeting profitable goals? And then, you know, the answer that comes to that in my heart, and that really silent voice, is that, you know, like the community will support that your work. You're building equity, and you're building business equity, and you establish yourself as a social enterprise, and you're gonna have to work a little bit harder with this concept. You're gonna have to extend yourself a little bit better to seek partnership to accomplish those goals of social investment. You're gonna have to make a lot of adjustments to support our community and support yourself in your business. And that's a decision. That's a decision that we had to look at, and me and my wife had to discuss it. Like, is it worth it? Because we have small kids. I have an 8, 5, and 3-year-old that I have to leave a legacy for as well. But you know, if we're living in South Central, we're off on Crenshaw and Slauson, that's where they will grow up. And you know, I think the final decision was like, you know, if they get at a certain age, they get to look around in their community and see something positive from the contributions of Hot and Cool. It's worth it. And you know, it's a crapshoot, seriously. But there's a part of you know, I hate to say it, a spirituality that says that, you know, if you help those who are in need, that you will be helped. And that's what I hold on to in the end. I believe the human being is the greatest creation ever. And I believe Black people, the most predominant, African-American, the most predominant human beings on this planet, considering we make up less than 1% of the way less, a small part of the population, but have an impact on the world. And so we've made the decision to sacrifice to help African Americans, believing that, you know, there's a reward outside of my projected figures on my Excel sheet. And we're going to live and die by that. We're going to continue to do it because I haven't wanted, and somebody didn't give up on me. And that's how I got here. And so we're extending that. It's tough. It's tough to look at your physical, your quarterly numbers and justify what you're doing. But, you know, I had a young person come up to me the other day because we now have indoor dining. And it's just like, thank you, Tony, for just getting through so I can have a place to sit down and just think about my next move. That's valuable to me. And that will give me the motivation to extend myself, to get resources to help make a movement. Because without this movement and without our people growing within South Central, then the impact of my business won't feel as good. Because I have a product that can sell to any demographic. But if I can use my product and my concept to help my community grow, I'm going to hold on to that.
And Tony didn't even mention, they just, like I said, living in the community. I met Tony because I walked into a coffee shop because we didn't have one. and wanting to have these things in the community. Some of the things I just, you know, he's being modest, but that they do. They have, you know, a community fridge. They have food initiatives. It was a voting center during elections. They have a mezzanine space that they have for tutoring and for just like so many different things that they, and please touch on some of these things, stop with the modesty, just like we want people to know that you can engage with the community and hopefully, you know, this will, can somebody put in Hoover a meetup at Hot and Cool so we can just support all of these efforts and hopefully figure out ways for us and our businesses. You know, my design practice, and even I'm open, and Tony has been a person I reached out to and said, I want to open this ice cream shop in Leimert Park. Can you share your business plan? And he's like, sure, it's 74 pages, but I used 5 of them. Like, he was super open about his experiences. And thank you for your vulnerability and honesty, authenticity in this conversation to all of you. You know, there are parts that have been, I'm sure, a difficult journey, but just really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to learn from your experiences and be inspired.
Our young people, our young people just need somebody to be patient with them. You know, they really do. I remember how many times how many mistakes I've made and I shouldn't be here. And like, they do want help. But it's hard for someone at a certain level and a certain age in their understanding of life we don't fail together. We don't, and that's what we do in my household with my kids. We fail, and I'm next to my 8-year-old, like, how did we get here? And that's what Hot and Cool does with the entire community. Like, well, okay, well, we made these decisions now. What are we going to do to get out of it? And that's what it takes. And, you know, the voting center that you mentioned, you know, it was an honor to do it because I had some kids to come in and to get their buffalo cauliflower wings. And it was like, oh, I can vote? And they signed up to vote and they voted. And 2 voted for Kanye. I'm not mad, but they did vote. And it's just being accessible for these kids to make a mistake and just go through the growing pains with the next generation, I believe is going to help us in the future.
Awesome. Awesome. Tactics, ways that you think have worked, that haven't worked?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to pass on this question because we don't do direct services. We do storytelling and journalism. I mean, I could go on about how we prioritize hiring homeless people or formerly homeless people and some of the other things, but you're running out of time here. And I think your other speakers will have much more benefit to the conference. So I hope you don't mind. And it's not that I don't have a big mouth. I think there's more benefit to people, and we don't have direct programs to really answer your question.
I would like to invite everyone to look at Mark's socials and Invisible People. I believe it's invisiblepeople.tv. And on social media, and Instagram in particular, it reminds me of Humans of New York, and in that it's storytelling with a face, and the things that you learn about individuals, and you're forced to kind of deal with your preconceptions from what people present. I found it impactful, and really appreciate that effort. Vincent, you work in so many directions. I'm sure there have been some lessons that have come from the plethora of areas that you impact in your work.
Well, I'll mention one, because I think it touches upon what a number of people have said before. When I worked at the Liberty Hill Foundation, I started this initiative called Uplifting Change. And the intention of that work was to help Black donors to be more strategic with their investing, with their philanthropy, with the intention of, there are, if you think about the history of the country and like the making of even Los Angeles, you think of like the Chandler family, behind the publisher of the LA Times and how they helped to build the city. Or you think about like the Rockefellers and whoever else who helped to build the cities in New York and whatever else. But in communities of color, we don't often uplift those people who are doing work under the radar, people like Tony. You think about development work, there are a number of developers of different levels who are doing work to build communities in a ways that Jason is doing with Destination Crenshaw that we don't uplift, but we need to have more of them. And so Uplifting Change, part of the whole idea was to bring together a community of those change makers on a small scale and to connect with each other and to be able to give them information, tools, and resources to be able to do it on a bigger scale. And from there, I know Candy, her organization was transformed. I know from that, a group called the African American Board Leadership Institute was created to train, over the past 10 years, has trained hundreds of African Americans to be on nonprofit and corporate boards, as well as commissions and other entities. They placed thousands of them, and from that, there have been at least 2 donor advised circles created where people get together, pool their resources, and give grants to nonprofit organizations and people doing stuff in the community. From that, there's been a lot of change that's happened because you're creating, you're uplifting local leadership. It's important to definitely give voice to people who are, to the lived experience of those who are being directly impacted by injustice. At the same time, you have to elevate those who have resources to be able to provide long-term support for those efforts. And so you mentioned, so like Tony's example of what he is personally investing into Limerick Park, what you're doing, Janelle, and so on and so forth. If we don't have more people like that in the community, then work at the grassroots can't sustain itself in a way that will be organic and really owned by the community. So we need to do more things like that on a systemic level to be able to really change the eco-structure of what we're doing. And I have to shout out, I know Michael Dory's in the room, and his mom, Fran Jamont, who many of you guys know or should know, has been like instrumental with Uplifting Change in so many efforts in South LA, and Michael and him himself, he has done a lot of amazing work.
Janelle, can I say something real quick?
In there.
Thank you. So I have to give Vincent the shout out, which we were going to do before the day is out, because Vincent was so instrumental in the growth and the positive trajectory of positive results. When I first started this, I had no clue what a nonprofit was. And I was really just trying to find my way. And I heard about uplifting change and I wanted to participate, but not only was it full, but I also didn't have the funding. And Vincent allowed me to participate, gave me a scholarship. And because of that, I met so many positive people that are still in my life today and helping us do the work that we do, because we do not do the work alone. It is a collaborative effort, but because of the generosity and the grace that Vincent and Liberty Hill provided us, we do that same work. So yes, not only do we work with youth and young adults, but if any agency calls me, if a person calls and says, I want to learn, I want to participate, I want to support, how can I help? We will spend time with them. Automatically, I'm going to give you at least an hour of my time and give you resources and tools and who you should reach out to. We will invite you to participate in the programs that we're doing. If we get a grant for, let's say, $5,000, I'm going to find another community-based organization that does similar work that we could re-grant to them and give them maybe $1,000 to come and do some work with us. And that's how you really get the work done. And that's how you spread the resources and be a blessing to not only the community, but to the organizations that are supporting the community, which are of the community.
I want to make a note, again, for everyone, not the participants as much, but the attendees, noting that there are levels to how each of the panelists is affecting change. There are people who have direct action or like direct with the end user interactions and initiatives. And there are people who work on the policy level in order to have a different impact. I was talking to my husband about this, and just with SoCal Noma in particular at the camp. I'm not a teacher in the camp, but have engagement with the organizing. That's my way of being impactful. But I feel like if people can find their place to be comfortable with participating in impact, it's there. And we should utilize utilize ourselves as resources for information, in time, in money, in whatever way that we can find ourselves engaged. And it's all valuable and it's all appreciated. So
can I just add one thing to that? So I think, thinking about the levels of engagement and like what is a movement, a lot of times the conversations that we have are at these differing levels, right? So when people have questions to me that I don't actually do, because I tell people all the time that, we're not a direct advocacy organization. We are a facilitator. We are a coalition builder. We are a stakeholder engagement for Destination Crenshaw, but we are building an infrastructure project. Let me find you the person that can actually deal with the solution that you're dealing with to better make sure that you have the access to those funds to be able to move those things forward. And I think it's important because I have done direct advocacy before. I was an affordable housing advocate. I was protesting and doing those things, but I also understand that there is patchwork that needs to be done with our political representation and the people that are actually in these boardrooms that need to be able to hear what these advocates are saying. So there is currency in being able to translate all these different kind of demands for what we want in equity, right? Like we need to be able to translate those things to palatable for the people that are writing the policy, that are moving these things forward. So we're not constantly doing the same thing that we've always done. So I think that, in this movement that we're building, continue to make space for other approaches. Understand that just because people are not saying your same exact words, don't mean that they don't agree with you. Right? And agreeing with you and communicating differently is for our collective benefit, because ultimately it is about taking steps forward and in trusting that people are doing those steps with you is going to actually be our goal, right? It's really building a community and knowing that just because someone is not walking directly like me, I can see them beside me, right? So I just wanted to really elevate that point that you brought up, because I think it is important to really be able to see that these different approaches are just that, the multitudes of Black and brown people. We have multitudes, we have different things that we like and enjoy, but that doesn't take away what we ultimately are striving for together.
Absolutely. And that's an ending word from Jason. I want to thank all of you again for agreeing to participate, to share your experience, to be vulnerable with us, to be open with your time and information. Everyone has put some information in the chat. Hopefully attendees can find it or dig into Whova to connect with our panelists. And I want to pass it on to who's called
me.
Okay.
Leslie, yeah.
Thank you, Janelle.
Closing out our
thank you, Janelle. Thank you. This panel was, I don't know, I think everybody is speechless and blown away and energized. It's been an incredible 2 days. I don't even know where to start. So I'm just going to start. I want to thank our incredibly generous sponsors. Thank you so much, because these conversations are possible because of you guys. Hats off to the best staff in the business. Corinne, Jessica, Will, Tibby, Steve, Lori, Nick, and Carlo, thank you for your unwavering dedication, your boundless energy, and your next level innovation. It is a pleasure to be on the board and to be in JEDI because of you guys. You make this, make us be able to put on these programs. I really hope that everybody's taken away something from this year's conference. And we'll be active participants in what's next for the communities and built environment of Los Angeles and beyond. A lot of work has been done. A lot of work is going on. There's so much left to do. Please keep the conversation going. We'll still be up on Whova. Thank you for being here. I really am looking forward to what's next. Thank you, everybody. Everybody give yourselves a round of applause, because this was amazing.